Picture a brilliant English physician walking through the bustling streets of 17th century London, observing how ordinary people learn, reason, and form their beliefs. This is John Locke in his 30s. Not yet the famous philosopher who would revolutionize how we understand the human mind, but already questioning one of the most fundamental assumptions of his time. What drove Locke to this radical inquiry was his deep skepticism about the prevailing belief that human beings are born with innate knowledge, that certain truths and moral principles exist naturally within every mind from the moment of birth. In a world where religious doctrine and political authority claimed absolute truths accessible only to the learned, Locke asked a revolutionary question: what if the human mind begins completely empty, as blank as a sheet of paper? What you're about to encounter is a philosophical breakthrough that challenged the entire intellectual foundation of Western thought and established the modern understanding of how knowledge actually develops in human consciousness. Tabula rasa represents one of the most revolutionary discoveries in the history of human thought, fundamentally transforming our understanding of knowledge, identity, and development by establishing that the mind begins life as a completely blank slate with no innate ideas, concepts, or principles. This groundbreaking insight emerged from Locke's meticulous analysis of how children actually learn language, moral reasoning, and abstract concepts, observations that convinced him that human understanding develops progressively through sensory experience and reflection rather than appearing fully formed at birth. The intellectual stakes of this discovery were enormous, challenging the philosophical traditions of Plato and Aristotle, the theological doctrines of inherited sin and divine wisdom, and the political assumptions about natural hierarchy and absolute authority. By demonstrating that all knowledge comes from experience rather than innate principles, Locke created a new foundation for understanding human potential, educational possibility, and social development that would influence the course of modern psychology, political theory, and educational philosophy. Locke's theoretical framework established experience as the exclusive source of human knowledge, operating through what he termed simple ideas, the raw sensory data that the mind receives from external objects via the five senses. These simple ideas form the basic building blocks of all human understanding, providing the fundamental materials that the mind processes, combines, and organizes through its natural operations of memory, comparison, and abstraction. The mind functions as an active processor rather than a passive receptor, taking these sensory impressions and creating complex ideas through psychological operations that include combining simple ideas into compound concepts, comparing ideas to identify relationships, and abstracting general principles from specific instances. This processing occurs through what Locke identified as the two great fountains of human knowledge: sensation, which provides ideas from external objects, and reflection, which provides ideas from the mind's own operations, creating a comprehensive system where all understanding ultimately derives from experiential sources. Tabula rasa operates through specific mechanisms that can be observed in how children actually develop understanding, beginning with the mind's capacity to receive impressions from external objects, where each sensory encounter creates lasting modifications in the brain's structure and function. These sensory data points form the raw materials that the mind organizes through comparison, combining similar experiences to identify patterns, and abstraction, extracting general principles from particular instances that can be applied to new situations. The development proceeds through stages where simple sensory experiences lead to the formation of complex ideas about physical objects, relationships between objects, and abstract concepts about time, space, and mathematical principles. Memory functions as the mind's ability to retain and recall past experiences, allowing the accumulation of knowledge over time, while the mind's capacity for reflection enables it to examine its own operations, creating metacognitive understanding about thinking itself. In contemporary education and psychology, tabula rasa manifests through our understanding of learning disabilities as disruptions in the normal processing of sensory information, demonstrating how environmental factors and neurological development interact to create individual differences in cognitive ability. The principle explains the critical importance of early childhood environment, showing how different experiential backgrounds create fundamentally different cognitive frameworks and knowledge structures, with children raised in language-rich environments developing superior language abilities, while those exposed to complex problem-solving situations develop stronger analytical capabilities. Current nature versus nurture debates in human development explicitly reference Locke's insight, with modern research confirming that genetic predispositions operate within environmental contexts that determine how potential actualizes into actual abilities and knowledge. The concept also explains how cultural differences emerge from different environmental experiences, with members of different societies developing distinct conceptual frameworks, moral intuitions, and knowledge structures based on their particular cultural environments and educational experiences. Understanding tabula rasa reveals that human potential is fundamentally malleable and dependent upon environmental influences, suggesting that proper education, social conditions, and experiential opportunities can shape individuals and societies toward greater knowledge, moral development, and rational understanding. This insight establishes the philosophical foundation for democratic societies by demonstrating that all human beings possess the same basic capacity for knowledge and reason, regardless of their birth circumstances or social position, thereby justifying equal rights and opportunities for all individuals. The principle provides the intellectual basis for modern educational theory, which emphasizes the importance of providing rich learning environments, scaffolded experiences, and appropriate stimuli to support optimal cognitive development. It also suggests profound implications for social policy, indicating that investing in early childhood education, reducing environmental disadvantages, and providing equal access to knowledge and experience can fundamentally transform human capabilities and social outcomes. Welcome to Sleepy Philosopher, where we explore the most profound ideas in human history slowly enough to truly understand them. Complex philosophy delivered at a pace that lets these concepts sink in. If this approach to philosophy resonates with you, consider subscribing and let us know in the comments where in the world you're listening from. Let's continue our exploration of Locke's revolutionary insights, because understanding tabula rasa is just the beginning of discovering how experience shapes every aspect of human consciousness and development. Locke's comprehensive refutation of innate ideas represents one of philosophy's most thorough assaults on intellectual tradition, systematically dismantling the belief that humans possess natural knowledge by demonstrating how all apparent universal concepts can be explained through experience and education. This attack challenged the fundamental assumption that certain principles, mathematical truths, moral principles, and logical rules, exist naturally in all human minds from birth, an idea that had dominated Western thought since ancient times. Through careful analysis, Locke demonstrated that children, uneducated persons, and different cultures varied dramatically in their understanding of supposedly universal principles, revealing these concepts to be products of education rather than innate possession. The concept of empiricism functions through two primary sources of human experience: sensation and reflection. Sensation describes the process where external objects affect our sensory organs and generate simple ideas, the basic building blocks of knowledge that enter consciousness through sight, sound, taste, touch, and smell. These simple ideas, such as the sensation of red, the taste of sweetness, or the feeling of hardness, form the fundamental elements from which all human knowledge derives. Reflection, the second source, describes how the mind processes these simple ideas into complex thoughts through mental operations including comparison, combination, and abstraction processes that transform sensory data into sophisticated conceptual understanding. This mental processing mechanism operates through several distinct operations that transform simple sensory inputs into complex knowledge structures. Comparison allows the mind to examine multiple simple ideas simultaneously, identifying similarities and differences that form the basis of categorization and classification. Combination enables the synthesis of different simple ideas into compound concepts, creating new knowledge structures that exceed the sum of their parts. Abstraction permits the mind to extract common properties from multiple instances, forming general principles and universal concepts that apply across different specific experiences. In contemporary science, this empirical framework underlies modern cognitive psychology experiments that demonstrate how environmental factors shape cognitive development, from language acquisition studies to problem-solving research that shows expertise emerges through accumulated experience rather than natural ability. Artificial intelligence development reflects Lockean principles in machine learning systems that acquire knowledge through data input rather than pre-programmed rules, while educational neuroscience confirms that learning occurs through synaptic changes resulting from environmental stimulation. This empirical foundation supports evidence-based teaching methods that emphasize hands-on learning and experiential education over purely theoretical instruction. This systematic rejection of innate ideas ultimately establishes human knowledge as progressively growing through accumulated experience, making education and environmental factors the primary determinants of both intellectual and moral development. The empirical framework places enormous responsibility on societies to create optimal conditions for human flourishing, suggesting that proper education and environmental stimulation can develop any human mind to its fullest potential. This insight transforms our understanding of human potential, revealing that differences in knowledge and capability result primarily from environmental differences rather than natural limitations, thus demanding social commitment to educational equity and opportunities for all individuals. Locke's analysis of simple and complex ideas represents one of the most sophisticated psychological theories of the 17th century, building directly upon his empiricist foundation to explain how the human mind constructs sophisticated understanding from elementary sensory building blocks. While his tabula rasa theory established that all knowledge originates from experience, this concept reveals precisely how the mind processes those experiences to create the complex intellectual capabilities that define human consciousness. The mind functions not as a passive receiver of information, but as an active processor that systematically transforms raw sensory data into abstract concepts, logical relationships, and creative innovations. This mechanism explains how identical human minds can develop vastly different knowledge systems while maintaining universal cognitive processes, demonstrating the fundamental architecture underlying all human learning and thought. Understanding this mental architecture provides the key to comprehending how education, expertise, and intellectual development actually function. Locke identified simple ideas as the fundamental atomic units of mental experience, basic sensory impressions, and awareness of mental operations that enter the mind uniformly across all humans, regardless of cultural background or individual differences. These include primary qualities like solidity, extension, and motion, as well as secondary qualities such as colors, sounds, tastes, and smells that exist as sensations rather than intrinsic properties of objects. The mind's active processing operates through three primary operations: combination, which joins simple ideas into compound ideas like the complex concept of gold from individual impressions of yellow color, metallic weight, and malleable texture. Comparison, which establishes relationships between ideas by identifying similarities, differences, and proportional ratios. And abstraction, which extracts general principles from specific instances to create universal concepts applicable across multiple contexts. These operations transform passive reception of simple data into active construction of complex knowledge structures that enable reasoning, creativity, and sophisticated problem-solving capabilities. The operational mechanisms of simple idea processing reveal a systematic mental architecture that functions according to consistent principles across all human minds. Simple ideas enter consciousness through sensory experience and reflection upon mental operations, creating a constant flow of basic data that the mind must organize and synthesize. Through combination, the mind creates compound ideas by joining simple impressions into unified concepts, such as constructing the complex idea of a tree from separate impressions of bark texture, leaf color, and branch configuration that exists simultaneously in awareness. Comparison operates through identifying relationships between ideas, establishing fundamental distinctions between concepts like hot and cold, while also creating more complex relational concepts such as mathematical proportions and logical inferences. Abstraction functions by extracting common features from multiple specific instances, creating general categories like animal or justice that can be applied to new situations beyond any particular experience. This systematic processing transforms raw sensory input into structured knowledge that enables complex reasoning and creative problem-solving. Contemporary research in artificial intelligence demonstrates these mechanisms with striking clarity, as machine learning systems must be trained on vast datasets of simple inputs before developing sophisticated problem-solving capabilities that mirror human expertise. Medical specialists demonstrate this principle through their ability to recognize complex pathological patterns in X-rays that remain invisible to untrained observers, having developed their complex pattern recognition through systematic processing of thousands of simple diagnostic elements. Educational neuroscience confirms these mechanisms through brain imaging studies, showing that expertise emerges through synaptic changes resulting from repeated processing of simple information, while mathematical education reveals how abstract mathematical concepts develop through systematic processing of concrete, numerical experiences. Language acquisition research demonstrates how children transform individual word sounds into complex grammatical systems through the same mental operations Locke identified, creating sophisticated linguistic competence from elementary phonetic building blocks. Clinical psychology applications show how therapeutic interventions can help patients process traumatic experiences by breaking them into manageable, simple elements that can be reconstituted into coherent understanding. Understanding this mental architecture reveals profound implications for human development, education, and social organization, demonstrating that all human knowledge and creativity emerges from systematic processing of elementary experiences rather than innate intellectual capacity or divine revelation. This mechanism explains why children from any background can potentially develop expertise in mathematics, philosophy, or scientific reasoning when provided with appropriate experiences and systematic mental training, supporting Locke's revolutionary assertion that human intellectual development depends upon environmental input rather than birth circumstances. The universal nature of these mental operations explains why democratic societies can function with equal political participation regardless of social class. Since all minds possess identical capacity for processing complex information and making reasoned decisions, educational policy implications emerge directly from this theory, suggesting that providing minds with rich, varied experiences while developing their capacity for complex mental operations through systematic practice will maximize human intellectual potential. This foundational understanding of mental architecture provides the empirical basis for modern educational methods, therapeutic interventions, and democratic theory, demonstrating how Locke's psychological insights continue to shape contemporary approaches to human development and social organization. Locke's revolutionary theory of personal identity established consciousness, rather than soul or body, as the fundamental foundation of personal identity, fundamentally transforming how we understand individual existence, moral responsibility, and human continuity throughout life's inevitable changes. This breakthrough emerged directly from his empiricist principle that all knowledge derives from experience, applied now to the question of what makes someone the same person over time. While traditional philosophy located personal identity in an unchanging soul or in the physical continuity of the body, Locke observed that people clearly remain the same person even as their bodies change completely through growth, aging, metabolism, and even traumatic injury. The question thus became, what psychological mechanism creates the continuity of identity that we all intuitively recognize? According to Locke's theory, personal identity consists entirely in the continuity of consciousness and the ability to remember past experiences as one's own. This psychological continuity, rather than any substantial soul or physical body, constitutes what it means to be the same person over time. The critical insight is that identity is not about sameness of substance, but sameness of consciousness. Specifically, the capacity to recall and recognize one's past experiences as belonging to the same self. When we say someone is the same person they were 10 years ago, we mean they can remember being that person, not that they possess the same material substance. This theory provides a solution to the philosophical problem of how personal identity persists through change, while also explaining how dramatic personality transformations, cognitive developments, and even memory losses affect one's identity. The operational mechanism of personal identity functions through memory links that create psychological continuity across time. When consciousness connects present experiences with remembered past experiences, it establishes the identity bridge that makes someone the same person. This memory-based continuity operates even when other psychological characteristics change dramatically. A person who was once cruel might become compassionate. A timid individual might develop courage. Yet they remain the same person through their consciousness of having been that previous self. The theory also accounts for partial memory loss and identity disruption. If someone cannot remember their past actions due to brain injury or disease, their personal identity becomes compromised, making them less responsible for those forgotten actions. This psychological continuity principle explains how we can meaningfully speak of being the same person despite constant physical and psychological change, while also providing criteria for when identity disruption occurs. Contemporary bioethics grapples directly with Locke's theory when making decisions about organ transplantation, treating patients with dementia, and evaluating brain damage cases. When someone with severe memory loss or personality change receives medical treatment, healthcare providers must determine whether they remain the same person who previously consented to treatment, using Locke's consciousness-based criteria. Legal systems worldwide apply Lockean principles when evaluating criminal responsibility for actions committed before memory loss or psychological transformation, recognizing that moral accountability depends on consciousness continuity. Modern psychology's understanding of narrative identity and life story construction builds directly on Locke's insights. As therapists help individuals create coherent personal narratives that establish psychological continuity, dementia care increasingly considers how to maintain personal identity when memory fails, while neuroscience research on memory consolidation and identity formation validates Locke's core insight that consciousness creates personal identity through temporal connection. Locke's theory implies that individuals remain morally accountable for their actions across time, even as they change, but also that personal growth and transformation are possible through developing new consciousness and memories. This creates the profound insight that identity is both continuous and developmental. We remain the same person through consciousness while simultaneously becoming different people through new experiences. The theory suggests that personal development through education, therapy, and life experience genuinely changes who we are, while the continuity of consciousness maintains moral responsibility for our past. This framework provides the philosophical foundation for understanding how human beings can be both consistent enough to be held accountable and flexible enough to grow, learn, and transform throughout their lives, establishing personal identity as an active, dynamic process rather than a static essence. Locke's theory of natural rights represents one of the most revolutionary contributions to political philosophy, fundamentally challenging the prevailing doctrine of divine royal authority that dominated 17th-century European governance. Through his analysis of the state of nature, a hypothetical condition where individuals exist without government, Locke argued that human beings possess inherent rights to life, liberty, and property that exist prior to and independent of any political authority. This concept emerged directly from his empiricist understanding of human nature, where he observed that individuals naturally seek to preserve themselves and acquire resources necessary for survival. The significance of this discovery cannot be overstated, as it established the philosophical foundation for modern constitutional democracy and provided the intellectual framework for later declarations of human rights that continue to shape contemporary legal systems. Locke's theoretical framework for natural rights rests upon two interconnected principles: self-ownership and the labor theory of property. Self-ownership establishes that each individual owns their own body and the labor emanating from it, creating an absolute right to personal autonomy and physical integrity. The labor theory of property holds that when a person mixes their labor with natural resources, land, materials, or unclaimed goods, they create legitimate private property that cannot justly be taken without consent. This theoretical structure emerged from Locke's empirical observation that humans naturally seek to improve their condition through work and resource acquisition. The rights function as natural law, existing independently of government, while simultaneously imposing moral obligations on individuals to respect these same rights in others. This creates a framework where rights are neither granted by political authority nor subject to revocation by majority opinion. These natural rights operate through specific mechanisms that govern both individual behavior and social interaction in ways that maintain both freedom and order. The right to life imposes both negative and positive obligations. Individuals must not harm others, while also having a duty to preserve their own existence and assist others in genuine danger. Liberty functions through consent-based interactions, where individuals voluntarily enter agreements and social relationships without coercion or arbitrary restriction. Property rights operate through the mixing process, where legitimate acquisition occurs only when labor is combined with previously unowned natural resources, creating a natural boundary between what belongs to individuals versus what remains common property. These mechanisms work together to create a self-regulating system where government intervention becomes necessary only to resolve disputes when individuals violate the natural rights of others, rather than to grant or limit rights according to political convenience. In contemporary legal systems, Locke's natural rights framework provides the philosophical foundation for constitutional rights declarations, property law, intellectual property protection, and international human rights legislation. Modern debates about wealth inequality, taxation, and redistribution frequently reference Locke's principles about the relationship between individual rights and collective welfare, with contemporary property disputes often examining whether legitimate acquisition occurred through voluntary labor or through force or fraud. Corporate intellectual property law applies labor theory principles to digital content, software, and innovations, while environmental regulations must balance individual property rights with collective rights to clean air and water. Human rights law draws directly from Locke's argument that certain rights exist independent of government recognition, influencing international treaties and domestic constitutional interpretation. Contemporary challenges to surveillance technology, digital privacy, and personal autonomy reflect ongoing applications of Locke's self-ownership principle in new technological contexts. Understanding Locke's natural rights theory provides crucial insight into the fundamental tension between individual freedom and social responsibility that continues to shape modern democratic societies. This framework establishes both the moral foundation for individual autonomy and the logical basis for limited government authority, creating a system where legitimate political power derives from consent rather than conquest or tradition. The ongoing relevance of these concepts appears in contemporary political movements, legal debates, and international relations where nations must balance individual rights with collective welfare. Locke's natural rights theory thus connects his earlier work on human consciousness and personal identity to political organization, demonstrating how empiricist understanding of human nature can inform just social structures that respect both individual dignity and collective responsibility. Locke's social contract theory represents perhaps the most revolutionary political insight in human history, fundamentally transforming how we understand the relationship between individuals and governmental authority by establishing that legitimate political power derives solely from the consent of the governed rather than divine mandate or military conquest. This groundbreaking framework emerged from Locke's analysis of a critical question: why would rational individuals abandon the freedom and equality of the state of nature to submit themselves to governmental authority, particularly when this submission inevitably involves accepting limitations on their natural rights? The answer, Locke concluded, lies in recognizing that people consent to government not out of fear or obligation, but as a rational strategy for better protecting the natural rights to life, liberty, and property that serve as the foundation of human dignity and flourishing. The theoretical framework of Locke's social contract rests upon several interconnected principles that challenge traditional notions of political authority while establishing new foundations for legitimate governance. First, individuals possess natural rights that exist prior to and independent of any political structure, making these rights fundamental and inalienable rather than granted by government. Second, the state of nature, while characterized by freedom and equality, contains inherent problems that make secure protection of these rights difficult through individual effort alone. Third, government emerges through explicit or implicit consent as a collective solution to these protection problems, creating institutional mechanisms for impartial justice and collective security that exceed individual capabilities. This framework establishes government as a conditional institution whose authority flows from citizens rather than governing downward from above, making political power derivative and accountable rather than absolute and self-justifying. The operational mechanisms of Locke's social contract function through what he termed implicit consent, a subtle but powerful form of agreement demonstrated by individuals who remain within a territory and accept the benefits of its governmental system. This implicit consent operates continuously rather than occurring only at initial founding moments, meaning that citizens maintain their agreement to governmental authority through ongoing choices about residence, participation, and acceptance of public services and protections. Governments, conversely, maintain their legitimate authority only by effectively protecting citizens' natural rights and serving the collective welfare, creating a conditional relationship where political authority must be continually earned through performance rather than presumed through tradition or force. The contract also includes provisions for dissolution when governments fail in their fundamental obligations, establishing a right of revolution not as sedition but as restoration of the natural order when political authority violates the conditions upon which it was established. In contemporary political systems, Locke's social contract theory underlies the fundamental principles of constitutional democracy, where government authority derives from popular sovereignty expressed through democratic institutions rather than hereditary succession or military force. Modern constitutional frameworks, from the United States Constitution to post-World War II democratic constitutions, implement Lockean principles through bills of rights that establish natural rights as prior to and limiting governmental power, creating institutional checks and balances that prevent arbitrary authority. The theory also provides intellectual foundations for civil disobedience movements, where citizens who believe governmental actions violate fundamental rights may justifiably resist through peaceful protest, inspired by Locke's argument that individuals retain ultimate sovereignty over their natural rights even when consenting to governmental authority. These applications demonstrate how Locke's 17th-century political insights continue shaping 21st-century debates about legitimate resistance, democratic accountability, and the proper limits of governmental power. The integrative implications of Locke's social contract theory establish political authority as inherently conditional and accountable to the people, creating democratic mechanisms where governments must earn and maintain citizens' ongoing consent through effective protection of individual rights and promotion of the common good. This framework revolutionized political thought by shifting the fundamental question of governmental legitimacy from what gives rulers the right to command to what gives citizens reasons to obey, reframing the entire relationship between individuals and political institutions. The theory's emphasis on consent also provided intellectual support for later movements for democratic revolution, including the American and French revolutions, while establishing philosophical foundations for modern human rights frameworks that view certain rights as inherent to human dignity rather than granted by government. By connecting his earlier work on natural rights to practical political arrangements, Locke created a comprehensive vision of human society based on individual dignity, rational consent, and institutional accountability that continues influencing how we understand the proper relationship between citizens and state authority. Locke's arguments for religious toleration represent one of the most revolutionary applications of his empiricist philosophy to questions of belief and authority, fundamentally challenging the assumption that political unity requires theological conformity and establishing the principle that genuine religious conviction cannot be compelled by governmental force. This advance emerged from Locke's recognition that religious beliefs arise from conscience rather than rational calculation, making forced religious conformity both ineffective and morally wrong, while recognizing that political unity requires shared civil interests rather than shared theological opinions. Living in 17th century England during a period of intense religious conflict between Anglicans, Catholics, and various Protestant sects, Locke witnessed firsthand how religious uniformity mandates led to persecution, civil war, and the very fragmentation they sought to prevent. His groundbreaking insight was to recognize that when government attempts to regulate religious belief, it inevitably oversteps its legitimate authority by meddling in matters that concern the relationship between individuals and divine authority, rather than the civil relations between people. The theoretical framework for Locke's defense of religious freedom centers on the fundamental distinction between civil interests and religious matters, with government authority properly limited to protecting life, liberty, and property, while religious concerns fall outside legitimate governmental jurisdiction because they address questions of ultimate meaning, salvation, and divine relationship that cannot be resolved through political coercion. This framework operates through the principle that religious beliefs function as matters of individual conscience rather than collective choice, meaning that individuals cannot simply adopt or abandon religious convictions at governmental demand without violating their authentic relationship with divine authority. Locke argued that religious beliefs arise from deep personal conviction shaped by individual experience, reflection, and spiritual seeking rather than rational deliberation that can be directed by external authority, making religious conformity through political pressure fundamentally incoherent and counterproductive. The framework establishes that government should remain strictly neutral toward different religious and non-religious worldviews, not because all beliefs are equally valid, but because political authority lacks competence to determine religious truth and must protect all citizens' freedom to pursue their understanding of ultimate questions without governmental interference. Religious freedom functions through specific operational mechanisms that distinguish between the civil and religious domains, while ensuring that governmental neutrality does not constitute hostility toward religious belief, but rather protection of all citizens' right to religious conviction and practice according to their conscience. The primary mechanism involves the requirement that government policies be religiously neutral in their application, meaning that while laws may incidentally affect religious practices, they must not be designed to promote or inhibit specific religious beliefs or practices for their own sake. This mechanism manifests in practices such as protecting religious organizations, property rights, and freedom of association, ensuring that religious groups can operate without governmental interference in their internal governance and religious instruction, and preventing government endorsement of particular religious institutions or practices that would disadvantage citizens of different faiths or no faith. The operational framework also includes exemptions from generally applicable laws, when compliance would require individuals to violate their sincere religious beliefs. Though these exemptions must be carefully balanced against other fundamental rights and public safety considerations to prevent religious freedom from becoming a license to harm others. In contemporary pluralistic societies, Locke's framework explains numerous legal protections and policy debates involving the complex intersection of religious freedom with other fundamental rights, including workplace accommodation requirements for religious observances, the presence of religious symbols in public institutions, and the limits of religious exemption from laws of general application. Modern debates about religious freedom in healthcare illustrate these principles when physicians or pharmacists object to participating in medical procedures on religious grounds. raising questions about whether accommodation requirements conflict with professional obligations to serve all patients equally. The framework illuminates controversies over religious displays on public property, where questions arise about whether nativity scenes, mezuzahs, or Islamic prayer spaces in government buildings constitute government endorsement of particular religious traditions or simply accommodation of citizens' religious expression. Educational settings present ongoing applications of these principles through questions about prayer in public schools, religious exemptions from curriculum requirements, and the balance between religious liberty and secular instruction, all of which require careful navigation of the boundary between governmental neutrality toward religion and reasonable accommodation of religious practice. Understanding Locke's approach to religious toleration reveals the profound implications of his broader philosophical system for contemporary questions of cultural diversity, secular government, and the protection of minority rights in pluralistic democratic societies. This framework demonstrates how his empiricist recognition of the diversity of human experience naturally leads to tolerance of different religious and cultural traditions, while his commitment to natural rights establishes religious freedom as a fundamental protection that cannot be superseded by majoritarian preferences or governmental convenience. The integrative insight is that genuine religious faith, arising as it does from individual conscience and spiritual seeking, cannot be authentically compelled by political authority without destroying its essential character, making religious freedom not merely a practical necessity for social peace, but a philosophical necessity for the preservation of authentic religious conviction itself. This principle extends beyond purely religious questions to encompass broader questions of intellectual freedom, artistic expression, and cultural diversity, establishing a general framework for protecting minority viewpoints and unconventional beliefs in democratic societies that remains as relevant today as it was in Locke's time. Locke's theory of education represents perhaps the most practical application of his revolutionary tabula rasa principle, establishing that human character and intellectual capacity result not from innate dispositions or divine predestination, but from the systematic environmental influences and deliberate instruction provided during formative years. This comprehensive educational framework emerged from Locke's recognition that since all minds begin as blank slates, every human quality, both virtues and vices, results from experiences, examples, and instruction encountered during development, making education the primary mechanism for both individual improvement and social progress. This insight fundamentally challenged prevailing views that emphasized natural aristocracy or divine calling in human development, instead positioning education as the democratic foundation for cultivating intelligent, virtuous, and productive citizens regardless of birth circumstances. Locke's educational theory operates through several interconnected principles that synthesize his empiricist philosophy with practical pedagogical methods. The principle of habituation establishes that repeated practice forms durable character traits as the mind develops preferred patterns of thought and behavior through consistent reinforcement. The example principle recognizes children's natural tendency to imitate adults, making parental and teacher conduct crucial for moral and intellectual development. Progressive complexity requires that instruction match developmental capacity, building from simple sensory experiences to complex, abstract reasoning. The principle of comprehensive formation addresses both intellectual abilities and moral character through systematic practice, rejecting the artificial separation between academic learning and character development that characterized much previous educational thought. Educational development under Locke's framework operates through specific mechanisms that transform the blank slate into educated character and intellect. The habituation process works through repeated exposure and practice, where children develop specific cognitive patterns and moral responses through consistent reinforcement of desired behaviors and thinking approaches. Example-based learning occurs through natural imitative tendencies, where children unconsciously adopt the reasoning patterns, moral judgments, and behavioral responses modeled by significant adults in their environment. Progressive skill building requires careful sequencing of learning experiences, ensuring that each new concept builds upon previously established knowledge while remaining appropriate to the child's current cognitive capacity. Moral formation operates through the same empirical principles as intellectual development, with children learning virtue through systematic practice, consistent modeling, and gradual internalization of ethical principles. Contemporary educational theory directly implements Lockean principles through constructivist learning approaches that recognize knowledge construction through environmental interaction rather than passive reception. Early childhood intervention programs demonstrate how enriched environments during critical developmental periods can significantly improve long-term cognitive and social outcomes, validating Locke's emphasis on formative experiences. Character education programs in modern schools reflect the principle of comprehensive formation, systematically cultivating both academic skills and moral virtues through deliberate educational design. Educational neuroscience research confirms Lockean insights about neural plasticity and the importance of appropriate environmental stimulation for optimal brain development, while socioeconomic research demonstrates how educational quality and family environment profoundly affect life outcomes, supporting the view that human potential can be systematically developed through proper environmental design. Understanding Locke's educational philosophy reveals how his individual-level insights about human development connect to his broader political theory about natural rights and social progress. The principle that human qualities result from environmental influence rather than natural aristocracy provided intellectual support for democratic ideals of equal dignity and political participation, while the emphasis on systematic character formation connected to his vision of citizens capable of self-governance and moral responsibility. This educational framework suggests that investment in quality education represents one of society's most important responsibilities for cultivating the intelligent, virtuous, and productive citizens necessary for maintaining free institutions and promoting human flourishing. Establishing education as both individual empowerment and collective necessity for maintaining democratic society and human progress. John Locke's philosophical framework achieved what few abstract theories ever accomplish. It became the literal blueprint for democratic institutions that would govern millions of people across continents and centuries. The transformation of Locke's European philosophical insights into American constitutional principles represents one of history's most remarkable instances of abstract political theory becoming practical governance. This cultural transmission occurred through the careful study and adaptation of Locke's writings by colonial American intellectuals who recognized in his work a systematic approach to political legitimacy that addressed their own specific challenges of creating new democratic institutions in a vast, diverse territory. The intellectual journey from Locke's 17th century English treatises to the American founding documents demonstrates how profound philosophical insights about human nature and political authority can shape actual governmental structures that continue evolving while maintaining their core principles. The theoretical framework underlying this transformation rests on Locke's natural rights theory, which establishes life, liberty, and property as inherent human rights that exist prior to and independent of government authority. According to Locke, these rights derive from human nature itself rather than divine grant or social convention, making them universal and inalienable principles that any legitimate government must respect and protect. The social contract theory provides the mechanism by which individuals consent to governmental authority while maintaining ultimate sovereignty over their fundamental rights, creating a system where political power flows upward from the people rather than downward from rulers. This framework establishes popular sovereignty as the foundation of legitimate authority, while simultaneously limiting governmental power through constitutional constraints and individual rights protections. The American founding fathers studied these Lockean principles as a coherent system for organizing political life that balanced collective self-government with individual liberty protection. The operational mechanisms of this philosophical translation become visible through examining how American institutions implemented Lockean principles in specific governmental structures and legal frameworks. The Declaration of Independence directly paraphrases Locke's natural rights theory, when it states that all men are created equal and endowed with unalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, establishing the philosophical foundation for American political legitimacy. The Constitution embeds Lockean limited government principles through separation of powers, checks and balances, and enumeration of federal powers, while the Bill of Rights provides explicit constitutional protection for individual rights against governmental overreach. The principle of popular sovereignty manifests through democratic elections and representative government, while constitutional amendments and judicial review create mechanisms for adapting governmental authority to changing circumstances while preserving core rights protections. These institutional mechanisms work together to create a political system that derives its authority from consent while maintaining robust protection for individual liberty against both governmental tyranny and majority oppression. Contemporary global politics continues reflecting Locke's influence through modern human rights declarations, constitutional democracies, and liberation movements that reference his framework for understanding the proper relationship between individual liberty and political authority. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights mirrors Lockean natural rights principles by establishing certain rights as inherent to human dignity rather than privileges granted by government, while constitutional democracies worldwide adopt frameworks for limited government and individual rights protection based on Lockean foundations. Modern debates about economic freedom, property rights, and limited government often explicitly reference Locke's framework when addressing issues like taxation, redistribution, and regulatory authority, demonstrating the continuing relevance of his principles for contemporary policy questions. Liberation movements and democratic revolutions continue invoking Lockean concepts of natural rights and governmental legitimacy when challenging authoritarian regimes, while international legal frameworks increasingly recognize individual rights as prior to and limiting governmental power. These contemporary applications show how Locke's insights about human nature and political legitimacy remain central to global discussions about democracy, human rights, and limited government. Locke's lasting influence demonstrates how philosophical insights about human nature and political legitimacy can create enduring frameworks for organizing political life that continue evolving to address new challenges while maintaining core principles about individual rights and consensual government. The American adaptation of Lockean principles shows how abstract political theory can be successfully translated into practical institutions that govern complex societies while preserving fundamental commitments to individual liberty and popular sovereignty. This cultural transmission required intellectual synthesis of European philosophical insights with American colonial experience, creating a distinctive democratic tradition that influenced democratic movements worldwide. The continuing global relevance of Locke's framework suggests that his insights about human nature, natural rights, and legitimate government address fundamental questions about political organization that transcend particular historical contexts and cultural settings. As democratic institutions face new challenges in the 21st century, Locke's framework continues providing conceptual tools for understanding tensions between individual liberty and collective authority, demonstrating the enduring power of philosophical analysis to illuminate and guide practical political development. Locke's complete philosophical system represents one of the most comprehensive and influential frameworks for understanding human nature and social organization ever developed. Integrating his breakthrough insights about knowledge acquisition, personal identity, natural rights, and political authority into a unified vision that continues to shape modern democratic societies. This synthesis emerges from his foundational discovery that human minds begin as blank slates, capable of infinite development through experience, which leads logically to his argument that individuals possess inherent dignity and the capacity for rational self-governance. Understanding this complete system reveals how philosophical insights about human nature can inform practical institutions that protect individual freedom while enabling collective flourishing, creating enduring guidance for contemporary challenges in education, politics, and social policy through the lens of human potential and consensual social organization. The theoretical framework of Locke's complete vision operates through systematic logical progression, where empiricism establishes the possibility of human knowledge and development. Personal identity theory explains moral responsibility and psychological continuity. Natural rights theory provides the ethical foundation for social organization, and social contract theory creates the political framework for protecting individual rights while maintaining collective security and progress. This unified system emphasizes that humans are fundamentally rational beings, capable of understanding their own interests and participating in self-governance, while requiring social institutions that respect individual dignity and provide opportunities for education, development, and voluntary cooperation. The framework suggests that legitimate political authority must derive from consent rather than tradition or force, and that governments exist primarily to protect the natural rights of life, liberty, and property that belong to all individuals, regardless of their circumstances or background. The operational mechanisms of this philosophical system manifest through interconnected processes where educational institutions develop individual potential through empirical learning. Political systems protect natural rights through constitutional limitations on governmental power, and social arrangements facilitate voluntary cooperation based on mutual respect for human dignity. These mechanisms work together to create societies where individuals can pursue their own conception of the good life while contributing to collective progress through reasoned deliberation and consensual decision-making. The system also includes safeguards against arbitrary authority through separation of powers, checks and balances, and the ultimate right of revolution when governments fail to protect fundamental rights. Contemporary manifestations include constitutional democracies that embed individual rights protections, educational systems that develop human potential through experiential learning, and legal frameworks that balance individual liberty with collective welfare through due process and equal protection. Contemporary applications of Locke's complete vision appear throughout modern democratic societies in practices ranging from educational policy that emphasizes developing individual potential through diverse experiences, to political systems that limit governmental power through constitutional rights and separation of powers, to legal frameworks that protect individual liberty while enabling social cooperation. Modern human rights declarations, constitutional democracies, and educational institutions that prioritize critical thinking and empirical inquiry all reflect Lockean principles about human dignity, rational development, and consensual social organization. The system provides guidance for current debates about religious freedom, property rights, educational policy, and the balance between individual liberty and collective welfare, while its emphasis on empirical inquiry and human development continues to inform approaches to healthcare, technology policy, and social progress that respect both individual autonomy and shared human flourishing. Understanding Locke's complete philosophical system reveals the profound insight that human progress depends upon creating social and political institutions that simultaneously respect individual rights and provide opportunities for development, education, and voluntary cooperation, implying that societies flourish when they protect human dignity, promote knowledge through empirical inquiry, and organize government through legitimate consent rather than force or tradition. This comprehensive vision demonstrates how philosophical insights about human nature and knowledge can create practical frameworks for social organization that continue to evolve and adapt while maintaining core principles about human dignity, rational self-governance, and consensual authority. The enduring influence of Locke's complete system lies in its demonstration that understanding human potential and natural rights provides the foundation for building societies that protect individual freedom while enabling collective flourishing through reasoned cooperation and shared commitment to human dignity and development.